Welcome to Rges Algebra 2. This is Lesson 15A, and we'll be discussing the sections 4.1a, 4.1b, and 4.2. We are starting a new unit on coordinate geometry, which has to do with graphing on a Cartesian coordinate system, which simply means that you have two number lines, one vertical with a 0 point, and one horizontal crossing through the same 0 point. This is the typically labeled the x-axis and the y-axis, and we call this the Cartesian coordinate system, because notice what we have here is something that can represent two variables. For every x value, you would get a y value. So this is very useful for graphing, graphing a lot of things, but we're going to first learn about graphing lines. Recall that a linear equation would have a variable to the first exponent, or to the first power. Okay, so if I said x plus 7, and that would be an expression that's equal to something, I could write an equation like this, written in two values. And every time you plug in a value for the x, you could solve a value for the y. And so between these two, I could represent a point on the Cartesian coordinate system. If I wanted to have, and I know that this is review for you, so I'll be going over it fairly quickly, but let's say I've got a number line going up in the y direction, positives going up, and then the negatives going down. And let's say I wanted to graph the point 3, 2. This first point would always represent the x, and the second point would represent the y. So to graph the first number, I should say, the first value should represent the x in my ordered pair, because I need both an x and a y value. Okay. So to graph this, I would go 3 on the x-axis till I got to here, and then I would go up 2 on the y-axis, and my point would be there. This is point, let's just say that we'll call that A. And this is point A right here. Let's do another one. If I have -2, 5 as my ordered pair, I go -2 on the x-axis, and then up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. About right there. And that would be point B. If I did -1, -3, I would go -1 on the x-axis, always going left or right, there's that, and go down or to the negative on the y-axis, so there's point C. So I think you've been exposed to that before, and they're just giving you a little bit of practice, a reminder, and checking your accuracy by having you find the area of whatever you sketch, and that's just good for doing your accuracy. Just do 1 through 14 on that. The next thing they expose you to in 4.1b is how to use a graph to solve word problems. So they have an excellent explanation of that on page 99. They're giving you a word problem. They're showing how to graph it, and where the two lines meet would be at what time one ferry overtakes the ship. And so read through that carefully, and as you go to the word problems on the top of 4.1b, you will be using graphs to solve those. So go ahead and get graph paper for that. You'll find that much easier to do. So very important, don't just solve it. You could solve that by equation, but I don't want you to. You're solving by graphing. So now we want to explain a different kind of word problem. down on page 100. This is called a work problem. It's got a kind of an interesting idea to it. So let me give you an example. It says, Eric can do a piece of work in 8 days. So it would take him 8 days to finish. And Louis can do it in 6 days. How long will it take them to work together? Now, this has a couple little tricks to it, but once it's been shown to you, it becomes a pretty straightforward way to approach these work problems. If he can do it in 8 days, what would his rate be per day? And his rate per day would be 1/8. He could do 1/8 of the job in 1 day, 2/8 of the job in 2 days, 3/8 of the job in 3 days, etc., all the way up till 8 days. Louis's rate, so we're talking about their rates, would be 1/6. 1/6 of the entire job in 1 day, 2/6 in 2 days, and we're asking how long would it take them if they're working together. Okay. Now, you realize that if I were to take the rate and multiply by the time, I would get how much work I got done. Okay, so if I had, for instance, like I was saying, if I can do, that's my rate, 1/8 of the job per day, and I have 4 days that I'm working on it, I will have worked 4/8 of the job, or 1/2 of the job. So given that understanding, I can make an equation that looks like this. 1/8 plus 1/6 to work together times x, the number of days. This would be the number of days. And altogether, well, let's go back to my Eric example. If I did 1/8 of the job in 1 day and I multiplied it by 8 days, what would that give me? That would give me 1. So 1 represents the whole job. So here I'm still figuring out how much it would take them together to do the whole job. So the whole job is represented by 1. And that's kind of I think, the tricky part of the problem the first day you see it. So to do that, of course, we'd go ahead and get a least common denominator. We'd multiply it through, and let's just do it, okay? My least common denominator would be 24. So I would have 24 times x times 1/8 plus 1/6. And just leave it that way. 8 goes into 24 3 times. And don't forget your x, so I would have 3x times 1, or 3x. 6 goes into 24 4 times, so I'd have 4x times 1, or 4x. And 24x times 1 is 24x. Then I'd add it. 7x equals, I'm sorry, I'm multiplying both sides by the 24, not the 24x. That didn't quite make sense. All right, let's go back and pull that. There we go, equals 24. 7x equals 24. Divide, and you're going to get x equals 24 over 7, or 3 for 21, and 3 remainder 3/7 days. And that's how that, make sure you understand that technique. You'll be using it for all 3 of your other problems. Now, the last idea would be to graph linear equations by using a table. So let's say I wanted to graph the equation 2y minus x equals 2. Well, first off, I would solve for y, and then I would create a table plugging in any values I choose for x and calculating the y value. Solve for y, then I'm going to create a table choosing x values, solving for y values, and then I'm going to plot the points. And then I'm going to draw the line. So go ahead and try to do that on your own, and come back in a few minutes and check what you have done against what I've done. Now, do recall that I'm allowed to choose any variables or any values I want for x. So because it's divided by 2, I'm going to choose multiples of 2. I'll choose 2, 0, and negative 2. Plugging 2 in, I'll get 2 over 2, or 1 plus 1, 2. I'll get 0 over 2, or 0 plus 1. And I'll get negative 2 over 2, or negative 1 plus 1. And these become my points. My points then will be 2, 2, 0, 1, and negative 2, 0. So go ahead and practice graphing your lines, and there's some more work problems for you, and then we'll talk about anything you have questions about once you come back to class.